On this week's episode, I talked to Taylor Gage. I've known Taylor or followed Taylor for a couple years. Oh gosh, more than a couple years. I would say 5 years now. And actually did some work with her a few years ago and have just been following her podcast and following along with her life's journey for several years now. And I'm so excited to have her as this week's guest because not only did we talk about the major life shifts that she's made in the past few years, but also several lifestyle shifts that she's made in the last few years. The biggest one being she sold almost everything that she owned and moved on to a tiny home on water, basically. She moved from Seattle, sold her house, and this was during the pandemic. It's such a great story, just like what a true life's adventure that she shares. We also talk about not only like the decluttering and the detachment from things, especially when you work so hard to check all the boxes in life, like getting married, buying a house, getting the job, doing all these things, and then wondering like what's missing, right? Sometimes there is too much safety in being too comfortable. And so her and her husband really shook things up when they decided to move their life onto a sailboat and travel the world. We also unpack, how exhausting it is to get rid of stuff and all the sentimental, emotional, physical, and mental attachment that goes along and putting your memories into a physical thing versus holding on to the memory itself. We also deep dive into how she has left the Instagram platform after creating a six-figure business from that, and because it was no longer in alignment with her and her values. And truly, we talk about what makes you comfortable and be intentional about how you want to engage with things and how you show up day to day, I think was one of the juiciest parts of this conversation. And also to choose your hard, work at something that you think is worth it. I love what she talks about, like this life that her and her husband have chose to live on a sailboat and travel the world. It's not all as glamorous as it might seem, or the sunset worthy photo that can you have in your mind. She said it's been hard, but she also said that to choose the discomfort of something that aligns with you, something that is worth it in the long run, because it is going to be tough, but also more rewarding and beautiful that you could have ever imagined as well. She said that some of her highest highs and lowest lows have been on this journey that they're currently on. And I just can't wait to share this episode with you. I re-listened to it after recording it this winter. I recorded it when there was snow on the ground, and it's now triple digits and super smoky where I live. So middle of summer here, and it was nice to just kind of reflect back to this conversation that we had. And Taylor, wherever you are right now, I hope you listen and you enjoy. And everybody, please help me in welcoming Taylor to the podcast. Welcome to the Kindred Journey Podcast, the podcast where women share their experiences of stepping into courage when comfort is no longer an option. This is the podcast for connecting in community with women who have been shaped by the liberating to challenging seasons that life endures. I am your host, Lesley. I am a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. I too have experienced these seasons in life, and I want you to know that you are surrounded by a community of courageous, real women here for you. I can't wait to connect, so grab your favorite beverage and join me on this kindred journey. Hi, Taylor. How are you today?
I'm so well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I am so excited to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to this a lot. You've been there for me through the years as far as a life coach, and I've listened to your podcast, I think going on 6 years. So I'm just honored to have you as a guest here today on the Kindred Journey podcast.
That is so cool. Yeah, I feel like in a very kind of neat way the tables have turned a little bit, and so it's really cool to kind of be on the other side of this and talk to you about some different and kind of interesting stuff, I think, today. So yeah, thank you, Lesley. It's very cool.
Yes. Well, since I know a lot about you from following your journey for the past, like I said, 5 to 6 years, but maybe you could share a little bit with the listeners about your life and who you are and maybe where you are today.
I love that. And I also I giggle a little bit to myself only because the question of like, okay, tell me a little bit about yourself always makes me laugh because I I stumble and trip and I often don't know how to summarize all of that in a sentence. But my best effort at that would be that yes, as you said, I am a mindset and life coach, and I spent a lot of years building a successful online business. And outside of my business, I had a home in Seattle, a husband, two dogs, like a wonderful community and social life and stuff in that area. And, I think all of the sort of trappings of a successful, you know, happy life, whatever it is, right, whatever that is. Um, and then in 2020, my husband and I decided to cash it all in. So we sold our house. We sold everything that was in it, just about. We have still like a tiny little closet in his parents' house with some things in boxes, but um, just about everything. I took kind of a sabbatical from my business as well, and we moved onto a sailboat, a 40-foot sailboat to travel the world. And yeah, it was 2020. We're now in 2024. So um, we left Seattle. I'm talking to you today from the Caribbean side of Panama. And yeah, we just kind of got rid of everything and sailed off into the sunset. And here we are.
Well, I still remember when you made that announcement in 2020 because I think I was actually in your cohort in 2020. So I think it was right at the end of that cohort that you were announcing this endeavor. And that year was a lot with COVID and changes and working from home and all the things that we had to navigate as a society. So, I mean, wow, I was like, I don't think I could ever do that. So I just commend you. I think it's such a thrilling, exhilarating adventure that you're on this journey called life and you're truly living it to the fullest. Did you guys have a sailboat or I mean, did you guys sail in the past? Was it something that's kind of just been sitting in the back of your brain like, hey, we should do this one day? Or how did it kind of manifest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I grew up around water of all kinds, the ocean, streams, lakes, all of it, but I never sailed. My great uncle, so my father's uncle, was sort of like a badass in the Navy, and he was like a stellar sailor. And so my father joined him, his uncle, to sail from Maine to Ireland when my dad was in his like young 20s, like maybe 23 or 24. And so while I wasn't a sailor, I grew up kind of hearing stories about my dad crossing the Atlantic Ocean when he was in his 20s, which I always thought, I mean, he just had these magical tales of all sorts of stuff. That was just very awe-inspiring. But I never really had any experience on a sailboat whatsoever. But I think it was when my husband and I were on our honeymoon down in the Caribbean that I think a seed got planted in his brain that like that was a thing that you could do because he had no real experience on sailboats either. And so, we lived in Seattle for 10 years. And after we bought our house, my husband started shopping for like just a little day sailor, like something that you tow behind your car and have to put in and assemble to go in. And so he bought one of those, just this little guy. So we did kind of play around in the Salish Sea a little bit on that, but by and large, this was sort of this was sort of my husband's fantasy that like he had been working on and reading about and really interested in. And I literally remember looking at him dead in the eyes and was like, let's buy a boat. Sounds great. I'm in. Love it. I will never live on a boat. And here I am. I laugh because um but it took quite a long time for me to kind of come around, but he had really spent years, like, I mean, he would buy textbooks and novels and I mean, he was doing so much research on this
Mm.
because I think we didn't really realize that this was something that you could do. And I think when that light bulb went off for him, it was like he was hooked. And when the light bulb finally went off for me, which it did, I was also like hooked. So we started kind of building like in I think it was like an 8-year plan to make it happen. Like and you know, arranging finances and doing this and that and like really figuring out how to do it like really like probably the right way. Um and yeah, so we had an 8-year plan, and about 2 months later, we were shopping for a boat and kind of made it happen. And I remember there was one afternoon where I kind of just looked at Mike, my husband, and I was like, this 8-year plan, just out of curiosity, what do you think like the soonest that we could make this happen actually would be? And he was on the phone with like brokers the next day, and we were looking for boats, and we had bought one and moved on to it within a few months. And so the 8-year plan got condensed way down, and we just kind of like pulled the trigger and went for it. So it was kind of a long time coming for this, definitely for him. It took a while for me to get on board, but once I did, I was really excited by the idea, and we just kind of ran with it. And yeah, I'm really glad we did.
That's so awesome. What was that condensed plan from 8 years to how many years did it take for you guys to get it done?
Um, I think it was May of 2020 that I looked at him and said, you know, how fast theoretically do you think we could make this happen? And then, yeah, we had appointments lined up. Like he was on the phone with brokers. Like the next morning, we had appointments lined up. So we shopped for boats through the summer of 2020, trying to find something that was, in our budget and checked all the boxes. And we found one, closed on it, and we moved aboard the end of November that month,
Wow,
that year. So like May to November is how fast
that's
that
crazy.
took.
And didn't you just do
Yeah.
a remodel with your house, or you just
Yes.
got to the kitchen remodel or something?
That's
So,
exactly right. We like January, I believe, 2020, we started remodeling our kitchen. It was in dire need, and it was really satisfying to do, and like I really enjoyed the process, and I felt like I made this like dream kitchen for myself. And the contractor like walked out like his last day of just like, fine-tuning little, you know, finishes and whatever, like his last like day of coming to just like do the last minute things. I think it was the first week in March. It was literally the next day that everything shut down. So the kitchen got remodeled, the pandemic literally hit like this.
mhm.
So we never even got to host a dinner party or like cook or like entertain in this house, which is still kind of breaks my heart a little bit. But yeah, we sold it, and but it was a good kitchen.
Wow.
I miss it sometimes.
Well, you could reinvent it again or recreate it again, maybe down the
That's
road.
exactly
So.
right. That's exactly right.
Well, thank you for that. That was more my poking and prodding out of my own curiosity to hear about that. I know I kind of briefed you a little bit before our conversation, but wanted to let you know that this is a sacred and safe space for you to
Mm,
share your story. So please feel free to speak freely. It's your story is honored and respected here. So
thank you.
have and I think my first episode I said, if you don't like this podcast, find another one. There's plenty of them out there.
Mhm.
So it's like, if you don't
Isn't
like
that
it, then
right?
so
Mhm.
this is what this space is for. And this is what I've created for women by women to have this
That's
space
awesome.
to share. So and if this is where we're headed, we could totally deep dive in, or if there's somewhere else you want to go. But if there is a specific moment or season of courage in your life, I know, like I said, I know a lot about you, and like you said, how to summarize yourself in a short nutshell. um, that you have stepped into courage when comfort was no longer an option.
Well, I think it's a great question. And, you know, for me, I think there's a lot of things that come up, but I think they all probably fall under the umbrella of the change that, yeah, I was just explaining, like this huge lifestyle shift that both my husband and I embarked on together. But like, yeah, I mean, it had happened quickly, as I said, like so like May to November. And so there was a lot of like reckoning that happened in those months that like and a lot of peacemaking that needed to happen in order to get rid of everything that I mean we had, like a 3-bedroom house with a detached garage and like 3 car. I mean, we had like all of the thing. We had so much and a house full of it, right? Like we all do. We kind of accumulate all these corners and little things filled with stuff. And so the process of going through and getting rid of everything was a really interesting one. And, I think more so that's there for sure. I think there's plenty of stuff of like actual moments like out on the ocean that come to mind as well. But I think m more broadly, like this idea of choosing courage over comfort, um, really like was at sort of the essence of the change itself, because I think part of what drove this decision for both of us was, you know, we had spent so many years like struggling and like living paycheck to paycheck and like uh just like trying to get by and whatever, and like we had finally kind of gotten to a place where things were kind of like comfortable, right? We had owned a house, we my business is doing well, we were kind of settling in, like things were feeling really really good. And that was so necessary after so many years of moving around the country and like just doing all these like starting over and over again. And I think something happened, and like there was a very subtle shift where things went from comfortable and like much needed, like stable, like stuff that we really like actually needed to, I think, too much of that. And I think
Mm.
things had become too comfortable for both of us. And it happened kind of like behind the scenes. Like I don't think either one of us really recognized it while it was happening. But I think we both kind of woke up to it and like, how did we like, we've lived in like we're not from Seattle, we're both from the East Coast, and we had all of a sudden spent a decade in Seattle and was like, a decade has flown by here. And again, like I said, a lot of it was much needed, like putting down roots and all of these beautiful things that I don't want to suggest aren't important, because I think safety and comfort has its place. But there was sort of like a threshold that got crossed where um, it kind of went from like necessary safety and necessary comfort to just like this kind of superfluous cushioning that I think kind of kept us from taking risks. And a lot of these things, like they're designed like that, like they're hard to get out of, owning a home or like a job that has a particular career path, or just any of these things, like they're super super difficult to get out of. And that was actually one of the things that surprised me about getting rid of all of these things, was actually how difficult it was to untangle yourself
Mhm.
from from a lot of this. um but yeah, I mean that was the whole ethos, I think, behind the decision, right? It just came down to that, like things are comfortable, things are really good. Is it too much? Like, do we need to like push some chips onto the table here? Do we need to kind of like take some risks? Um and so I think that really defines all of the little micro, like lesser moments in this change altogether. So yeah.
Do you feel like you and your husband were risk takers before all of the boxes started to accumulate, the checking of the boxes started to accumulate? Do you feel like when you didn't have maybe as many responsibilities or, like you said, the things that provide comfort and safety. But do you feel like you were more risk takers, either as single or when you were newly married or dating?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would I think myself more than my husband for sure,
Mm.
but to some degree both of us. Like I, you know, I'm a I feel like the traditional path never really appealed to me and didn't really fit me very well. I mean, I have been expelled from two schools. I got kicked out of high school and I got kicked out of college. And and so ever since I was like 19, I kind of just like moved around a bunch and I just explored and tried stuff. I just like waited tables where I could. And, I lived in downtown Boston for a little bit. Then I moved out to Martha's Vineyard for a while, which is an island off of the coast there. And then I moved to Vail, Colorado, blindly, like I didn't know anybody. I had never been there before. I just like showed up with a car full of shit and was like, "Hey, here I am. Let's go." And I actually met my husband there. And
Okay.
then we moved out to Lake Tahoe, California, and then back to Vail and to the East Coast of New York and around. So we were in this like process of like moving and sort of starting over a lot. And I really loved it. I love this feeling of just showing up in a new place that you maybe haven't even really been before. And like, there's a particular way in which you pay attention when you're standing in a terrain that you've never been before, right? And we all know this because as we like live in our house, whatever we've been in for a while, we drive the same route to work, we drive the same route to the grocery store every day, and like we stop noticing stuff, right? And when you're new in a place, you notice all the details, right? You're really paying attention in a way that's different. And I loved that. I loved this feeling of like showing up in a place and being like, I could be anyone I want to be here. Like it's just like it's all new and I loved that. So we had this kind of pattern, like definitely me before I met my husband, but then a little bit together. And I think that's why when like 10 years elapsed in Seattle, we were like, holy smokes, like how did this 10 years? Like I haven't lived in any place for 10 years since I was like, the house I grew up in. So yeah, I think it was like I needed to kind of rekindle that sense of adventure. And this just seemed like a really awesome and kind of scary, but also really cool way to embrace like an untraditional life and, keep going down a little bit of an, uh, not quite expected path, something that maybe is off the beaten path a little bit, but still feels like right and exciting to me. And so, um, that's what, yeah, it just felt really appealing for that reason. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. And I think you're so right about something that you said as far as there's a particular way that you pay attention when things are unfamiliar or new because we do, and I think that ties to there's so, there is a correlation with too much comfort, and you get in your routine and you take your route to work, and you sometimes you just don't even, your brain is just automatically in that mode and you don't think about it. But also, I feel like you and your husband also kind of came home to each other, and like you said, you've kind of lived in from East Coast to West Coast, and doing this kind of seems in alignment with starting new and living in all these places that you've already lived.
Yeah, that's definitely like I think why it really piqued our interest and it just kind of began to feel more and more right. And I think there were a lot of sort of channels I think that converged in making this decision. I think both of us felt really compelled to just live more simply and a little bit more like sustainably, I
Mhm.
think. Like and so it was appealing for this reason. We run our home on solar power here and we make our own drinking water and like we're really like a self-sustained literally vessel. And I think that was really appealing, just like minimizing like and kind of taking things down a little bit, like looking around. And yeah, like I said, there's just like an accumulation of like things that happen, even if you're not really trying, right? Especially with stuff like Amazon, where you just click, buy and things just get delivered over and over and over again. And it's so easy to do that. And we were there. And I think we just kind of started to realize that these things weren't really in alignment with our like greater core values of like living more simply and living more sustainably, and living like a little bit off the beaten path, like we've been talking about too. Like we just kind of woke up all of a sudden, we're like in this house in the suburbs in Seattle, and just like how did we get here? And we felt so fortunate to have been able to be there. Like I said, those years laying the foundation were critical in order to be able to do what we're doing. Like we had to do that financially for a lot of reasons. Um, but at the same time, like we started to realize that it really can become a trap. Like it's really difficult to get out of. And more importantly, I think it's scary to get out of. And I think this is where the courage idea comes in, right? Like, it's really scary to to take a risk that way, especially like, we're in our 30s. These are like the prime like income earning years for most people, and where they're making like big decisions about, family and career and the whole thing. And I think it was just like it took a lot to be able to like, I suppose trust is the word to reach for here,
Hmm.
where trusting that it was going to work out, even if it was like a big mess, even if it was chaotic, even if nobody else understood what we were doing, because like nobody else understood what we were doing. We got a lot of like like smiles when we told people like oh, we're happy for you, but eyes were everybody's eyes were like terror and confusion, and it was just you know um so yeah, I mean there was a lot to consider in the months that we made this decision. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, it was an 8-year plan that got condensed into
Yeah.
about, 6 to 9 months. And so
Totally.
that's pretty drastic. Figure your shit out,
Mm,
in a hurry. But I think a few things that I love what you said. I think I can relate. My husband and I have actually talked about decluttering. Even though
mm,
we have another one, the Amazon trap fell, late nights of breastfeeding my first son. I'm like, what do I need? And it needs to be
yes.
here by the morning. And I really fell into that. And it's so automatic that you just, oh, it'll be here in a day. Or now you can pick overnight, 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. It's just crazy to me, like how instant our world is. And we are such a consuming culture.
Mm,
And like you said, to live simply and sustainably is more alignment with your values, and to shift from the cultural norm of but you had to be there in order to get where you are today.
yeah,
And so it's part of
it's
the
true.
process. It's part of the experience. And so I just wanted to touch on those things because and you said something earlier about getting rid of things was hard. Was it?
Yeah.
Um, I've listened to minimalist audibles, or trying to, when we moved houses, I was like, hey, let's get rid of stuff, donate stuff, what we don't need anymore. And then obviously just coming off the holidays, it's just so much, it's
Yeah.
just it's overwhelming. I feel like we don't need I would rather have an experience, or can somebody come spend the night and watch our son so we can go on an overnight date because we don't have family here. So it's just stuff like
Yeah.
that, where it's like that's starting to mean more to me versus the things and the more stuff. So
Yeah.
I can totally relate to everything that you're saying. I can also relate to the scary, because I feel like right now, in my 30s, and have an established career and starting a family, and it would be scary to I dream of homesteading barefoot, with
Mm.
a baby on the hip. And I would love a more
Hmm.
simple mountain lifestyle. That's what I've been craving lately. And so I feel like I can relate in that sense. But it would be trade, there would be trades, but it seems very scary to like give this up. And something that has stuck with me since working with you is you can live two ways of being uncomfortable. You can live
Mm.
uncomfortably in alignment with yourself, or you can live
Mm.
uncomfortable, not in alignment, and serving others, or doing something that's not, in alignment with your core values.
Mm. Yeah. And I think I that's effectively what we, realize. Like once I think once we kind of just like I don't know really like specifically if there was like a single thing that sort of catalyzed this like sort of waking up where we just like looked around and we were like, oh my God, like what's happened and what's going on here and how can we like do something else? But once we did that, like it was really hard to like unsee. Yeah, it was like, okay, we need to kind of like, yeah, make some changes here. And getting rid of stuff is was hard. It was hard in several ways. It was hard, like literally just to like physically get the things out of your possession, right? I mean, like we sold as much as we could, we donated the rest, we gave things to friends and family, but it was like an exhaustive effort to like list this stuff online, to meet up with, I mean, like really like look around your home or your apartment or whatever, and all of these things, like the stuff that's not absolutely necessary, it's a lot of stuff. And we were also kind of lucky because when we sold our house, our the people who bought the house bought some of our furniture and stuff, so that simplified some things as well. But um, yeah, it was a lot. But then it was also like, you know, there were some things getting rid of that were like a little bit emotionally difficult, right? Like I donated my wedding dress because I just had this thought of like part of me wants to keep this for some sentimental reason, but I think functionally, like, I don't need to keep this, right? Like the wedding is what I keep, right? The marriage, right? My memories, right? And I
Right.
think that's really what it came down to is it was really a study on understanding the meaning that I had projected onto physical items. And I'm a very sentimental person. And so this was a lot of work because, I'd look at some little tchotchke and it'd be like this whole story and all of these beautiful memories of like who I maybe once was or what I was doing or what that meant to me or what this represents about some time in my life, whether it was difficult or profound or meaningful or something in between. And then to be able to get rid of the item but retain the meaning was a really interesting study in understanding like my projection and uh sort of I like to think of it as I think I've explained it this way on the podcast before, but I think of it as that scene in like one of the later Harry Potters where like Voldemort has his like essence in all of these like items. I forget what they're called, Horcruxes,
Hmm.
and he has to go and kill. And I think we do this, right, with items. We kind of like embed what feels like pieces of our soul into items. And so getting rid of the thing in a lot of ways means also destroying that piece of who we are. And it becomes really scary for that reason. Now, I held on to the stuff that I absolutely couldn't part with. There's no need to like force yourself to do any of this, but
Sure.
it was a really interesting study. Yeah. And decluttering and getting down and really like looking right at why this thing is so meaningful to me. And like, can I get rid of the thing and understand that I still get to retain like the beauty of whatever it might represent. Um, so yeah, it was interesting getting rid of stuff. Yeah.
I think that's interesting. And how did you feel through that? I mean, obviously that process took courage, I'm sure, to, like you said, to you're looking at this thing face to face and saying, do I
Mhm.
need this? I can still, part of me is not gone if I get rid of this. So how did that feel after? I mean, through that process, you kind of just explained what the process was, but how did you feel free? Did you feel, like you said, you live a more simple life? Like, does it not feel as heavy with clutter and things? Like, how does it feel? I mean, I'm very curious.
Yeah, I think I mean, it felt scary too, right? Like when it was happening, like I'm not going to say it wasn't like, I wondered if I was like putting the packing tape on the box to send my wedding dress to donate. And I'm like, is this the right choice? Like I had a lot of doubt about some of these like, bigger, maybe more important things, um but at the end of the day, yeah, you nailed it. I mean, really like lighter, freer, and I think a more clear understanding of who I actually am. Because I think, as you said, in this like really like consumer driven culture that we live in, we conflate who we are with what we have or how we dress, right? It's all these sort of like outward facing things that we put our identity into and say, this is who I am. And I mean, this is like how all of capitalism works. It's like, do you want to be this kind of person? This is the product that you need to be this kind of person. Buy this and you'll be that person, right? And so when we get rid of that product, we're like, am I that person anymore? Like, did I lose my identity? Who am I without these cushy things to like tell the world or tell myself who I am?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was also kind of like a nice, um, yeah, it was scary, it was freeing, but it was also, I think, very grounding in the sense that like my identity doesn't lie in the things that I own or the clothes that I wear or the brands that I purchase, or the products that I'm interested in or buy. Who I am is in here and can't ever be taken from me. And so I think it was powerful in that regard as well.
I love that. I think something also that maybe you can touch on that I'm again also aware of. Feel like I could give your introduction. But you know, something that you just said as far as what I wear and what I consume, and we live in a society where those tangible things matter, in quotes.
Yeah.
And I think something else that I've navigated and not struggle, you know, just navigated, is social media. So maybe
Mm,
you could go into what you
yeah.
decided to do a year ago. And I know you talked about being authentically in alignment with your true self on your most recent episode of your podcast, which
Yeah.
I reached out to you and said I totally resonated with.
Eh,
I think the algorithm thing is like if you don't keep up, then you don't, and it's
yeah.
overwhelming. And I think of, I call it mom brain, had pregnancy brain, had bride brain. My husband's like, when is this brain thing gonna, like, when is it gonna stop? You know, when are you gonna stop passing the torch? But I think if you don't keep up and you don't put post or you don't do a story, or you know, it's like then you fall behind or whatever it's
Yeah.
projected onto um us as content users or consumers, or were the content being consumed. Maybe you could touch just on maybe how that made you feel in the process of grieving uh
Yeah.
social media, and however you want to
Yeah.
take that. But I think that what you did is courageous, because some people can't live without their phones. Some people can't live without social media. I chose to take it off of my phone and just have it on my iPad. So I had that physical boundary of awareness of when I was scrolling. And honestly, I haven't posted on my personal account in a long time. I did create a Instagram for this podcast, and I'm trying to navigate where in alignment with myself does this
Mm.
serve me and this podcast, because I want to reach women and connect with women and share other women's stories, but I'm not going to be the one posting every day, sharing stories, you know, doing all the check boxes for these algorithms to reach the masses. I want quality over quantity.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. I have a storied and complicated relationship with social media. You know, my business exists because of social media. Like I built my business on Instagram. Like there's just no two ways of saying that. Like Instagram is where it started. I expanded to the podcast in maybe 2019 or something like that,
Mhm.
2018. I started a podcast. So I really just had these two channels of the podcast and my Instagram that yeah, was like audience building and reaching out to people. It was the way I like heard from my audience and chit chatted and like shared and grew. I mean, it was like, and I really, really quite enjoyed it because like I said, there's a beautiful network of people on there. I got to actually have these like instant feedback things when I'd share a post about some story or something and having people be like, oh my gosh, like this is me too. Like, you know, I feel this, I hear this, or thank you, or whatever it was. Like that was like a very satisfying thing to have these exchanges with the real people on the other side of these Instagram accounts. But um it grew into a monster for me. It grew into a monster, I think, both slowly and quickly. I think it was like there was like a slow chronic build that had been coming for a long time. And I think it just hit a breaking point at, for whatever reason in 2020, probably because social media in general just became like a very hostile, weird,
Keyboard
like it just was a
warrior.
war zone. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a war zone. And but it had been something that was building in me for a long time. And just I had this like resentment and this frustration that would build, sort of like what you said, like if I would spend all this time crafting some post and some caption, and like maybe, and the algorithm would just like, play with me like it plays with all of us. And it would be like, it would land to crickets, right? And I would be so frustrated. And then I would do something silly or like repost like a meme and it would like go viral. And I'd be like, ah, like the stuff that I want that like matters to me is like not landing. And there was a lot that was feeding into this. In fact, I wrote this like ridiculously long essay that explains all of the things that I was kind of struggling with when it came to social media. But I think most importantly for me, what I had realized was how much I mean, in the land of Instagram, my following is still considered extremely small. I think at its peak, it was maybe like 24 or 25K, which in Instagram is peanuts. But in whatever that might mean to like having an audience of 25,000 people listening to what I say, like I realized that even like I started to realize like the level at which Instagram was like integrating my psyche and my view of myself insofar as like I would literally start thinking in captions and I would
Mm.
imagine like photos and headlines and like what's the lesson and the takeaway. And like my entire like interiority became like
Programmed.
infested with the features and language and the whole thing of Instagram. And that I think was when I was like, whoa, holy shit, this is not. And I think when we combine like the algorithm and the way that things were changing, like they had just introduced reels and were like really pushing reels and everything else went down. And I was like, dude, I I'm not gonna dance around on a video to get likes.
Right.
Like it's again, like I'm not gonna do it. And I think it occurred to me at that moment that like here I was thinking that I was working for myself, that I built this business on my own, that I owned this business, I owned my marketing, I owned my audience, whatever it was. And I realized all of a sudden that I wasn't actually working for myself. I was working for Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in trying to increase engagement for Instagram. And if I followed their algorithmic, um,
Mm-hmm.
formulas, right? I'm really just benefiting them more than I am myself, especially when it's going against my own values. And
Your
like
own.
like I said, exactly. So I just had this crossroads where like, dude, I'm like, this is absolutely a mess. This is like this is changing the way I'm thinking about myself. This is changing. I also realize like I'm what I sell, what I do, the work that I'm here to do, the women who are coming into my program, like not exclusively, but by and large, are coming in with issues and concerns that, if aren't born on Instagram, are absolutely exacerbated by Instagram. And I'm like, I can't, in good conscience, sell this program on the platform that's poison, like that's
Causing the
creating the
problem.
problem.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. No,
And
absolutely.
so it was a swirl of a lot. As I say, it's complicated and I could rant on this for a long time. But anyway, long story short, I decided to close my professional account and leave the app. Yeah, I needed to leave the party.
Well,
And so I did.
your essay is very beautiful, and maybe I'll include the Substack
That's
link
nice.
in the
Thank
show
you.
notes because it I resonate with a lot of what you say, and I think something that you talked about stuff can maybe correlate with social media and taking pictures and not being like I've been really trying to having a toddler and another one on the way is really engaging me to slow down and be in the present moment because that's
Yeah.
all they know. And when my son sees me on my phone, I'm like, what am I doing? I have my son right in front of me. So I think something that kind of correlates with social media or just presence and how we have these they're great. I mean, and Instagram is a tool, but we end up becoming the tool in the, like you said, following the algorithms. But with like just putting your phone down um
Mm.
and being in the present moment and sitting with yourself. I feel like we're kind of conditioned to just, especially with like you said, the reels and the algorithms, and we're always waiting for the next thing. We can't just
Mm.
be present. And so I think um maybe stripping some of that away or taking the phone away and sitting with your own thoughts is kind of like decluttering your physical stuff, but also the intangible things like your thoughts and
Yeah.
sitting with yourself. And anyway, so I just think that's something that kind of was a parallel for me just in talking with you as far as um and being in alignment with yourself. Like you just shared on your last episode that yeah, you get on it sometimes for a joint account you and your husband have, and that's what works for you. But like you
Yeah.
said, to run a business and I feel like this all or nothing approach, like, well, you said, and so
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think there's a lot of correlation there between decluttering of the tangible things and decluttering of the intangible things as well.
Yeah, I think I think there's never in human history been more ways for us to escape than there are now. I mean, they're literally in your pocket at any, I mean, you can zoom off into space whenever you want and just out of reality, you know. And in some ways that's awesome. I mean, sometimes that's exactly what we need to do. But I think, as you say, it happens a lot, and I certainly found this for myself to be the case, that it happened more and more without a conscious decision ever being made about it. Like I would just like be in Instagram, be just in the same way that I like woke up 10 years in Seattle with a home in the suburbs and the whole thing. I just like would wake up like, an hour deep into the scroll and be like, dude, I don't even remember opening my phone, let alone the app. I'm just like in it, right? And so, yeah, I mean, my message has never been that everybody needs to sell everything they own and move on to a sailboat or move out into the forest and live in a hut. And you don't need to like shut down and leave, technology and your phone and internet. Like these are really helpful things and tools, as you say. But really, what I want through sharing some of this is to help people just take some initiative in reevaluating their relationship to and with these things. Because if you're not making the conscious decision about, from the small stuff in your day to how much you're looking at your cell phone to the big stuff about how you're living your life and the path that you're following, somebody else is. And I want for, the people who, you know, listen to my show or work with me or whatever, what I want more than ever is for you to be making those decisions about when you're logging into Instagram, or how many years you're working in this career path or living in this city, or being in this relationship or whatever it might be, right? Just doing it because it's convenient and it's comfortable and it's in front of you is very, very easy and seductive, right? It's a lot harder to be able to make actual decisions about, I'm going to log into Instagram right now because I wanted to check to see if this person responded to my message. I wonder how, because that's the beautiful thing about these things. Like you
Hmm.
can message in such an easy way. And that's part of the reason I love it. It's like, I want to see where in the world my friend is now because, I've met so many like people in this lifestyle who are spread out all over the globe right now. And to just be able to log in with an intention and then close it out is a totally different thing than, at least for me, where I was, where I'm like, yeah, an hour deep in the scroll, or my brain and psyche and self-image and how I think of myself as like a moderate public figure or like a teacher or a coach, like it absolutely infiltrated my life. And so I think the takeaway for all of these different, changes and stuff that we're talking about here today is really just like evaluating your relationship honestly, like just taking an honest audit at this stuff, because sometimes that is the hardest part, is just like really being quite clear with yourself about your current state of relationship or dependence on, or avoidance of some of this stuff. And then bringing some intention into how you actually want to engage with these things. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more, maybe it's different, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. There's no one size fits all. But as long as you're actually feeling like you're making a decision about this stuff rather than just waking up in the middle of it being like, how did this happen? To
Hmm.
me, that's a win, right?
Yeah.
That's a win.
I I totally resonate with that, and I think that's something I'm currently exploring with in turning not a new leaf, but yeah, becoming almost a mom of two. And how do I want, knowing what I know now, how do I want to show up for this next baby? And so I think that's so beautiful, and I love everything that you said, and maybe that's what it was, but hindsight 2020, knowing what you know now before you stepped
Mm,
into all of the seasons that we've talked about and the moments that we've
yeah.
talked about, what would you have told your old self?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me is it's going to be way harder than you think it will,
Mm,
and it's going to be way better than you think it will.
I love that.
And that's really been the case. I mean, we knew when we did this that we were signing up for a hard life. I mean, it on the surface, I think looks maybe it doesn't look easy, but it looks like, it's sort of this fantasy. Like we're always like anchored off of these beautiful beaches and, like sunsets and dolphins and oceans and whatever. And it kind of like has this like sense that it could just be this like fantasy, but it's extremely challenging,
Hmm.
really tough. And we knew that going in, and that was part of the decision. Like we wanted to work at something that we felt was worth it. Like we wanted to choose our hard, right? Like choose the discomfort that we thought aligned with something that would be worth it in the long run. So we knew it would be tough, but I still think even then, I would say that it is harder than I thought it was going to be, but also really more rewarding and more beautiful than I thought that it could be as well.
Mm. And kind of similar question that I asked you about the decluttering. How do you feel now? Like, look, like you said, I'll never live on a sailboat, is what you told your husband. And now here you are. Like, how
Yeah.
is your life more in alignment with who you are and your core values? And like you said, the society boxes or whatever boxes you thought you were checking off, like and like choosing this. And how do you guys feel? Like, is it
Yeah.
so like you said, it's harder and better. I guess that's maybe a good summary and to just drop
Yeah.
the mic and leave it there. But is there anything you want to add to that?
I think like yes, our my life aligns more with who I am, but I think also who I am has taken shape around this life as well.
Mhm.
And so I think there's been sort of like a mutual shaping. And I think that is something that I'm most grateful for. And it's really interesting because I think it's shown me, yeah, how little I really need. I think it's shown me uh, the hardships that I am capable of enduring. I think it's shown me um, the super like scary stuff that I like can make it through. And I have no idea how long we're going to do this. This isn't going to be a forever thing, but um, our agreement was that we're going to do this for as long as it's fun, first and foremost, and as long as it's, sustainable, as long as this is something that like makes sense. And so I have no idea, where we'll be in like a year or whatever, but it's been it's it's brought me some of the lowest lows I've ever had in my life and some of the highest highs as well.
Mhm.
It's been
Mhm.
an ass kicker and just like a mind blower,
Mhm.
like it's been a lot of both. And so it feels good for that reason. But if you asked me that, maybe 6 months ago when I was like really in it and struggling and having a hard year, like I'd be like, Lesley, this sucks. I've got no wisdom for you. We're selling this thing. We're getting out. And here we are. It's amazing how quickly um uh moments can turn. And they say that. They say out here, you're gonna get your highest highs and your lowest lows, and you'll have like one of the best days of your life. And like it could be even like that afternoon or that evening or the next day, you have like the most devastating, awful day of your life. I mean, things turn so quickly. And I can confirm that. And so I think, right now I'm in a moment where like things feel really, really good.
Mhm.
And this has been like I feel really grateful to be where we are. And it's been really incredible. And we're also with a great group of people, which really is a wonderful touch as well. There's like a wonderful community out here, which I wasn't quite expecting, but really
Do you travel
enhances,
together?
yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
for the most part. So it's been very cool. We've become quite close. So yeah, like that's really enhanced like the high highs. And so right now things are feeling really great. And I'm glad that I'm here doing what I'm doing.
Well, good. Well, I'm so happy for you, and you look awesome, and I'm glad to hear you're doing well. And I feel like sailboating is similar to motherhood. You would have had this conversation with me at the beginning of the week. I probably wouldn't be the same person or same attitude I have at the end of the week. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, well, thank you, Taylor, so much. And maybe you could share where listeners could find you. I know you just did a rebranding of your podcast, and there's a few other
Yes.
spots that listeners can maybe tune into you.
Yeah, so my two main channels of sort of creation and uh like content and the stuff that I'm putting out into the world right now are my podcast and my newsletter. So both are titled Rewilding. So the podcast is Rewilding. It was formerly She Thrives Radio, so I don't know if your podcasting updates, but either one will pop up. And then yeah, my Rewilding newsletter is through Substack. So taylorgage.substack.com will take you there. But links to all of this also just exist on my website, which is taylorgage.com. So that might be an easy place to go as well.
Perfect. Well, I'll include all of that in the show notes. So
Thank you.
as well. So thank you again, and I happy sailing and best travels.
Thank you so much, Lesley. This was really fun and great to talk to you. And I really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me and listening to the Kindred Journey Podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please consider taking the time to rate and review the podcast and share this episode with family and friends who you think might enjoy it. Your positive feedback helps me reach more courageous women like you. This is my passion project, so without you, I wouldn't be here doing this, and I deeply appreciate your support. Until next time.